Rome, October 1940. Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, was having a truly magnificent day. The kind of day where the sunlight seemed specifically engineered to enhance the profile of a man who believed himself to be the spiritual successor of Caesar, only with better tailoring. His mood, however, was perpetually threatened by a persistent, irritating psychological itch named Adolf Hitler. Hitler, the upstart, had been bagging whole countries, Poland, France, the Low Countries, with brisk efficiency of a high-end German vacuum cleaner salesman. Meanwhile, Mussolini's score sheet was thin. Ethiopia, check, but a bit messy. Albania, check. A vacation spot, really. The Mediterranean must be Mare Nostrum, Mussolini boomed, addressing a baffled aide who had merely come in to adjust the thermostat. But how can it be our sea if the Germans are getting all the good parking spots? They have barely sent us a postcard since conquering Paris. Greece, that is the answer. A swift, decisive victory, a Christmas ornament for the new Roman Empire. He consulted a map, though, primarily to admire his own reflection in the glass. Greece looked conveniently small. It was early autumn. The troops were ready. Mostly. The equipment was modern. In theory, the generals were well. They were his generals, which meant they were dedicated to their own political survival. Above all else, I shall give them the orders, Duce declared, tapping the map with a gesture that suggested he had just invented strategy. Pietro Badoglio, have him prepare for invasion by the 28th. Albania is the springboard. It must be done before the Germans have time to finish polishing their boots. We must prove we are a parallel axis, not a satellite state. The aide cautiously mentioned, Duce, should we perhaps wait for a detailed weather forecast? The Pindus Mountains can be quite unpredictable weather, Mussolini scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. The Italian spirit transcends meteorology. Besides, the Greeks are barely armed. This will be over by lunchtime. Scene 2. The Stumbling Orders. Chief of the Italian General Staff, Marshal Pietro Badoglio received his marching orders. Or as he later privately lamented, his stumbling orders. Badoglio was a man whose primary strategic skill lay in maneuvering his rivals into less comfortable chairs during meetings. The enemy was not the Greeks. The enemy was any other Italian general who might steal his glory.
His glory,
Greece, Badoglio muttered to his assistant, General Scipione, who was frantically sorting documents detailing how to effectively polish boots using only captured French cognac. So soon. We have not even properly finished feuding over who gets control of the Ethiopian administrative budget. It is the Duce decree, Marshal. He wants it swift, launching from Albania. Ah, Albania. Badoglio sighed dramatically. A logistical nightmare disguised as a conquered territory. Did we remember to pave the roads? No, of course not. That was General Graziani's job, and I sincerely hope his department collapses under the weight of his own incompetence. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. Badoglio's primary concern was not the Greek enemy, but ensuring that if the invasion succeeded, he would be the one handing the olive branch to Mussolini, and if it failed, that Graziani would receive the blame. Scipione timidly laid a thin, heavily annotated report on the desk. Marshal, the observers in Germany returned this detailed study on their Blitzkrieg tactics, combined arms operations, close air support, fast maneuverability. Perhaps we should integrate some of these principles into the Greece plan. Badoglio did not even glance at the report. He pinched the bridge of his nose. German tactics. Why would we pollute our beautiful, fundamentally Italian notion of warfare with their vulgar mechanical theories? We shall rely on sheer numbers and motivated infantry. If we need armor, we will simply tell the infantry to be more armored. And besides, we will study it when the war is over. Put it in the non-urgent pile. Definitely German. Therefore, suspicious pile. And so, with a brilliant stroke of strategic blindness, Italy prepared to send 2 divisions equipped for skirmishing in the North African desert into the Pindus Mountains in late October. Fueled by ambition, rivalry, and a crippling lack of foresight. Scene 3. General Frostbite and the logistics collapse. On October 28, 1948, the Italian vanguard trundled into the Pindus Mountains, using the recently snapped-up Albania as a launching pad. They expected a casual hike, perhaps a mild skirmish, followed by champagne and congratulatory telegrams. What they got was the meteorological equivalent of a betrayal. The Pindus Mountains, it turned out, did not subscribe to Mussolini's optimistic weather forecasts. The unusually early and aggressive cold front descended with ruthless efficiency, transforming what should have been an autumnal march into an Arctic horror show. But the uniforms are designed. For North Africa, wailed a supply sergeant, whose gloves had disintegrated into wet clumps of wool. Within the first 2 hours, we have sand gaiters. We need thermal underwear. Where is the thermal underwear? The answer inevitably was, it was mistakenly shipped to a depot in Libya. General Graziani fault, I assume. The Italian logistical system, famously efficient when dealing with small. Sunny Italian towns collapsed faster than a cheap deck chair. Roads turned instantly to mud. Then, treacherous ice. The substantial number of tanks, the pride of the modern army, proved utterly useless. They either sank up to their turrets in the mire, or slid uncontrollably down icy ravines, often taking the road structure with them. Sir reported a frustrated young officer watching an entire column of vehicles grind to a halt because a mule had frozen solid in the middle of a hairpin turn. The pack animals are dying of hypothermia faster than we can resupply them. They were not acclimatized. The major, swaddled in blankets, clearly intended for the officer's mess, back in Tirana, squinted up the mountain face. We'll tell the troops to carry the supplies. That is what. Legs are 4. We have to maintain progress. Duce expects speed. The troops, hardy men, not wholly incompetent, as Erwin Rommel would later grudgingly admit, did try. They pushed, they pulled, they suffered. But the combination of inadequate clothing, non-existent traction, and a supply line choked by its own inefficiency was a systemic failure. No amount of individual bravery could overcome. Frostbite began claiming thousands of toes and fingers, transforming the advance into a grim, agonizing shuffle. Within 11 agonizing days, progress stalled. Scene 4. The Vengeance of the Virgin Mare. Meanwhile, in Greece, the situation was absurdly different. The Greek troops were not clad in modern uniforms. Their arsenal consisted mostly of equipment left over from the Great War, rifles with wooden stocks that splintered if you looked at them sternly, and manuals, shutterstock, that occasionally required a working knowledge of Koine Greek to properly load the ammunition. However, they possessed 2 crucial advantages the Italians tragically lacked: sheer, terrifying morale, and a masterful propaganda machine run by authoritarian Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas. Metaxas, despite being deeply unpopular due to his dictatorial ways, proved to be a genius at narrative control. He spun the inevitable difficulties into glorious patriotic struggles. But the true psychological weapon had been handed to him weeks before the invasion. In August, an Italian submarine with truly spectacular timing had torpedoed the Greek light cruiser Elli. This incident coincided precisely with a major festival dedicated to the Virgin Mary Metaxas. Seized the narrative instantly. The deceased crew were not casualties, they were religious, martyrs. The conflict was not a political squabble. It was a holy crusade against the vile Italian oppressors. The pious, fiercely independent Greek population was whipped into a patriotic and theological frenzy. Did you hear? One elderly Cretan villager asked another, preparing to hide her goats and retrieve her grandfather's obsolete rifle. They attacked the Holy Mother. Festival, the Duce has offended orthodoxy itself. Well then, the second villager replied, spitting dramatically. Let us see how his modern tanks fare against the wrath of God and a very cold winter. Thus, the Greek soldiers faced the Italian onslaught with an iron resolve forged by religious fury and Metaxas's constant media barrage, painting the Italians as cowardly and incompetent. They knew they were outgunned. The entire Greek Air Force consisted of a pathetic 79 planes. But they had the weather, the terrain, and the conviction that they were defending their homeland and their faith. And then the British showed up, adding another layer of quiet, effective chaos. Thanks to having cracked the Italian military encryption, the British RAF flying sorties from Crete was able to provide the Greeks with incredibly accurate intelligence on where the hapless Italians were trying to hide their frozen rations. Scene 5. A full-blown panic. The stage was set for the farce. The Italians, paralyzed by systemic feuds and frostbite, stood still. The Greeks, propelled by righteous fury and good intel, moved on. On November 14th, the impossible happened. The Greeks were not merely defending, they launched a unified counteroffensive. The sight must have been baffling to the Italian high command. Waves of men, barely supplied, charging forward with great war rifles, somehow coordinated despite their lack of radios. Fueled by Metaxas' promises and a shared hatred of the cold, the Italian line, brittle, due to command rivalry and logistical starvation, shattered. The panic was immediate and absolute. "They're pushing us back," screamed a demoralized major, watching his infantry retreat past the frozen corpse of a mule, carrying 20 pounds of entirely useless summer gear. "But how? We have modern infantry weapons," demanded his colonel, whose main concern at that moment was whether his supply chief had managed to salvage his personal espresso machine. "Sir, the modern infantry weapons require modern ammunition, and the roads are choked. Plus, they keep appearing where our intelligence reports said they could not be. Thanks to the British, I suspect." The counteroffensive threw the Italians into a desperate, headlong retreat back toward Albania. In some sectors, the Greeks penetrated as far as 50 kilometers, 31 miles, into what was supposed to be the Italian launching pad. The Duce, glorious, swift victory, was now a humiliating, chaotic rout. The advance only ground to a halt when the Greeks themselves finally lost momentum. Not because of Italian resistance, but because they had run out of fuel boots and the ability to drag. Captured enemy supplies back up the mountains. A grim, frozen stalemate ensued. General Badoglio, safe back in Rome, and already blaming General Graziani in a series of scathing internal memos, had to admit the unthinkable. This was not a victory. This was a disaster that required external intervention. In Berlin, Hitler, already mentally mapping out his glorious invasion of Russia, received the news of his allies' performance. He reportedly looked at his map of southern Europe, then at the weather outside, and sighed. The sound of an Axis partner realizing he was now shackled to a very ambitious but deeply freezing liability. The stalemate would only be broken months later, in April 1941, when the Germans reluctantly arrived to clean up the mess. But before the Wehrmacht could intervene, the Greeks still had one more absurd act of archaic defiance. Left to perform an act of heroism so profound it would echo the battles of antiquity, fought not by demigods, but by farmers with rifles older than their fathers, holding a cold, unforgiving ridge against the might of the Italian Empire. They were digging in at an obscure, icy strategic point known only as Hill 731.